it would be, I think, wrong to say that Dark Shadows was immediately influential, because it, having gone off the air in 1971, I think it took another 10 years probably before we started seeing the other soaps start to take those bold, wild, weird storytelling chances. And I think that was probably General Hospital was the one that sort of got that started again. The Adventures of Luke and Laura, after the initial, unrequited love, romance sort of stories had been told, started to get pretty crazy, and to the point of one of the storylines involving the potential freezing of Port Charles by this mad scientist. And of course, Luke and Laura, saved everybody from that fate. But that was a decade after Dark Shadows went away, so it's kind of hard, I think, to connect the dots. I'm not sure that you can or can't, but it's the rest of the daytime dramas by no means jumped on the bandwagon the way we see today. When something's a hit, suddenly we have 5 or 6 clones of it. It took a while, and then even after General Hospital did that and had tremendous success. In fact, its crazy storytelling really saved that show, because that was on the brink of cancellation too. So that was all well and good, but we didn't see other shows pick that up either. We got to flash forward another 5 or 6 years to the later 80s, when One Life to Live decided to grab audiences with some crazier elements, such as Vicky, the leading lady on the show, leading character, had an out-of-body experience and went to heaven. We saw some time traveling to the Wild West. At one point, the characters found this lost underground civilization known as Eterna, which was, right under the city of Landview. So they did some silly things. And then, we got to jump ahead another 5 or 6 years to when Days of Our Lives came along and decided to have Satan come to town and possess Deidre Hall's character, Marlena. And pretty much from that point, which, was the mid-90s, the shows have by and large stayed frequently outrageous, trying to blend more realistic elements with the fantastical, whereas Dark Shadows was a show that was all fantastical after a certain point. The general sort of way of trying to do the soaps now is to throw in the supernatural element with the more classic standard elements of soap. It works sometimes it doesn't, but it's certainly a completely common and accepted way of making soap operas now. I mean, we've seen Kim Zimmer's character Reva on Guiding Light has been cloned. She's been a ghost. She's come back from the dead, countless times. She astral projects. They had the big storyline where she'd shove her keister into this old painting and wind up in the Civil War era. Port Charles, which was the spin-off of General Hospital, after a kind of standard start, decided it would just completely turn itself over to vampires, and that became the show itself was a show about vampires. So you see the effect of Barnabas Collins, but a good 30 years later, almost like it was reinvented, almost like it was new, but it really wasn't, of course. Phenomenon completely unique to Dark Shadows was the fact that the show has remained available to audiences and beloved by audiences. There's no other case of a daytime drama being repeated after its run until very recently, when SoapNet started picking up a couple of old soaps, Ryan's Hope and Another World being 2 examples. But Dark Shadows, man, it just kept going. It first of all was completely maverick in the fact that motion pictures were being made of Dark Shadows while the show was still on the air. No soap opera has ever had that, and gosh, actually, with the exception of X-Files, no other primetime shows come to mind where a movie's been made while the show is still on the air. That's certainly a rarity in all of entertainment. But Dark Shadows, just in the repeats, in the merchandising of the show, in the incredible just wildly successful fan events that have gone on. It is completely unique to all other soaps. No other show can claim to have done that. And in a way, it's almost comparable, I think, to the Star Trek phenomenon. Both shows, the original series, ran, they're finite. They're Dark Shadows ran 5 years, Star Trek ran 3 years. The fans who love and are obsessed by these shows, they know all the shows, they know the lore. They're interestingly quaint, unique, sweet projects, kind of caught in time, and they're almost iconic in a way that some of our great movie stars who died too young have remained great stars, like Marilyn Monroe, like James Dean, like earlier eras, Jean Harlow, Rudolph Valentino, just captured in time, and they'll never grow old before our eyes and become Marlon Brando. I mean, it's that interesting showbiz thing that happens, and we look back and see. I think now we can see what would appear to be a lack of sophistication in Dark Shadows, but for the time it absolutely was not a cheap, flimsy show. It was right up there with the rest of the things that were being produced, and probably more lavish because of the very nature of the show itself. It was a simpler, less sophisticated time, but I don't think that the audience back in the late 60s thought of the show by any stretch as being simplistic or done on the cheap or the sly. It was not that way at all. Easy to look back and think that, but I think in the same way people look at Star Trek now. We're so sophisticated in terms of special effects and makeup and all those things, and we look back at the original Star Trek and it can look kind of almost goofy and silly by comparison, but at the same time that is part of the charm and the appeal. It's a period piece, Dark Shadows, and for that very reason, I think it has endured. One of the hallmarks of any good show is that it creates talent. It doesn't just hire a bunch and launch with a great cast. It as time goes on and characters must be introduced. It's a great opportunity to create some stars, and Dark Shadows certainly did that. Most of course with Kate Jackson, who would later in Charlie's Angels go on to be the biggest thing in the country. David Selby was instantly magnetic and embraced by the audience. He was, I think had the classic, leading man looks, but had an edge and a humor that the writers at the time really worked with. Dark Shadows, for all its hip, campy values, looking back, was really a very serious show. It took a while for the humor to start being brought into the show, and that did start with pretty much with Selby's entree to the show, but it was played straight, But so were all the other soap operas. Now we're in an era where comedy is regularly tossed into the daytime dramas. It's just part of the staple of what soaps are, just like action, adventure, and mobsters, and all kinds of other things are now just just part of the way these shows are made, but this was not a time where comedy was even thought of as being necessarily even appropriate. So in a way, Dark Shadows was groundbreaking in that respect too. It certainly took that to not the lengths that you see done today with comedy, but it was absolutely there, and it was very, very different for the time. Very different.